hope you can hear me and you can also see me. That's why I come up here. Yeah, thank you. Now, this is the title of my talk, and this is a photograph taken in Burma. It's on the beach in Burma. So if you have never been to Burma, I strongly recommend you to go and visit Burma. Now, before I talk about my topic, I'd like to say a few words about my take on autonomy and what does autonomy mean to me, and with reference to what other people say, as well as with reference to my own experience. Now, there is a lot of people have talked about autonomy, and one of the common features of autonomy is like ability and willingness to take charge of one's own learning. And later on, the term taking responsibility or take charge has been replaced by other similar terms like taking responsibilities or taking control over one's own learning individually and collectively, and making informed choices about learning processes and what we want to learn and how we want to learn it, etc. And a lot of people have also talked about various types of autonomy, like autonomy as a communicator, as a person, and as a learner. And they also talk about different degrees and autonomy as a client or autonomy, like from high-level autonomy, making big decisions, to low-level autonomy, making small little changes to your language as you use it. And they also talk about various degrees of autonomy and various versions of autonomy, like psychological, technical, and political versions. So what is my take on autonomy? My take on autonomy can be regarded as more like a psychological version. Like other people who adopted that kind of psychological version, I believe that autonomy is a universal human potential, and it is triggered by circumstances. And students can demonstrate autonomy in various forms that we do not normally recognize, and in various levels and degrees. So where does this take on autonomy come from? Not only from my reading or the literature on autonomy, but I think more importantly from my own personal experience with various students that I have met for various research projects when I was investigating about other issues which are not about autonomy. And I have met students in Thailand, Nepal, and Burma, Myanmar. So I'd like to tell you about the stories of those students first. So the first story is from Thailand. And this is the beautiful Grand Palace, which I visited several years ago. And you can see I was supposed to be taking the photograph of my sister at the bottom with the sunglasses, and I decided to take the picture of the Grand Palace instead because it was more beautiful. So don't tell my sister. So this is the beautiful Thailand, and I met a student here a long time ago, and I interviewed him for my other research project, which was about interestingness at the time. And he told me about how he became interested in studying English because of something significant happened to him outside the class. There was a failure with his English outside the class, and suddenly it triggered his interest in learning English, and he suddenly became very autonomous. He exercised his autonomy. So what did he do? So these students had made me believe that some conditions can trigger a desire to exercise one's autonomy. So this is what he said in the interview. Before that incident, I was lazy, waiting for my father to push me into English environment. But after he had that experience, he became very interested in studying English, and he didn't wait for any command from his father. I knew exactly what I had to do. So what did he do? Every day when I wake up, I turn on the English radio. I try to spend my time in the English environment, even thinking. So what did he do? If I don't have anyone speaking English with me, I speak Thai one sentence, and I'm thinking English to practice my brain speaking English, so that when he is in the right situation, he can speak English fluently without having to spend time thinking about it because he has practiced his brain all the time. Now, the second story is from Nepal, which I went there a couple of times, more than three times. And this is beautiful Kathmandu. And I also did my research project there, just observing teachers and students in natural local classroom environments, and I was interested in how they teach and learn. That's all I was interested in at the time. I have also met students there who demonstrated various kind of autonomies in various forms in highly constrained learning and teaching environment. If you have been to Nepal, you will know that we are very lucky here. We had electricity all the time. In Nepal, they had electricity only for about 4 hours the whole day, and it is split into 2 shifts. Like they had 2 hours and 2 hours later on. And the time is rotated all the time. So sometimes in the middle of the night, people wake up and they do all the things that they are supposed to be doing when they have the electricity. So there is very poor resources available, and the time for teaching is also very short. Classes are very like 30 minutes lesson, and teachers are busy all the time. But despite all these constraints that they have, students demonstrated autonomy in various forms. Like they tried to look for learning opportunities in their home environment, using family members and siblings and others in their community, like what Holiday would call demonstrating autonomy in forms that we do not easily recognize unless we go to their home, right, to find out what they do. So here, I'd like to tell you a story about a student that I met there. And this is beautiful Kathmandu, and they had the ring street go around the hill. And here, he was talking about various kind of things that he did at home to improve his English. And here, he said, whatever experience I have in this classroom and in this university, I express it in front of my parents when we are having dinner. I usually tell the jokes that teacher tells us in class. When we are having dinner and they laugh, they congratulate me. So the teacher tells them the joke in English, but he talks to his parents in mother tongue. So like natural use or translation. And he also does many other things, like I usually look at the dictionary. Actually, I don't have a dictionary, but I borrowed it from my friends, and I look at the dictionary. So if I get any difficult words, I check it in the dictionary. I also have many other people that I can ask in the local community. So he looks for all the other resources that are available in his environment. And he doesn't own a dictionary, he just borrows it from the friend. And there's also other things, like how he used the textbook. There are many vocabulary in the textbook. I try to use them in my writing that my teacher gives me. I include those words so that the memory of those words will be kept in my mind and I will never forget it. And there's also other things that he does. If there is any mistake that I write, I try to read it and I correct it. Because the teacher gives them lots of homework, but the teacher never collects any homework from students. Teachers are very busy, and they don't have time to do the correction. And every teacher there has 2 jobs. They have one job in the morning in one university, and then move to another university in the afternoon. So they had 2 jobs. And he also asked his sister. My sister encourages me to write about something. She often gives me some topics to write, and I write. I write whatever I know I write, and she checks and she reads, and if it is good, she congratulates me. If it is not good, she suggests to me to make it good. So if we observe those students only in the classroom, we will never see those various activities that they do at home, exercising their autonomy. Now, my last story is from Burma, my motherland, my homeland, and I'm from Burma. Here, too, I have met many students who demonstrate learning, who create learning opportunities outside the class, demonstrating autonomy in various creative forms, which I would like to call creative autonomy. Now, I'd like to tell you a story about a student that I met there. I had a research project there, which was for a longitudinal 4-year study, and it gave me an excuse to go back to Burma area to collect data. So I've been following those students for 4 years. And here, one student, she had a very unfavorable circumstance at home. She lives not with her parents. Her parents were in the village, remote area. She lives with her relatives in Rangoon. And she did not have the support of the family for her studying. She had a very busy schedule at the restaurant that she worked for her relatives. She studied English in the evening from 5 to 8 p.m. So despite all these negative, and she is Christian, and she speaks Karen and Burmese, and she's studying English as a foreign language. So despite all these negative circumstances, she tried to create her own opportunities to improve English using Bibles, which are the only resources that are freely available to her, written in all three languages. Like one is in Burmese, the other is in in English, and the other is in Karen. So she used them while she was working at the restaurant to improve her English. So how did she do that? She read the Bible in all three languages, Karen, Burmese, and English, and she worked out the meaning of the English text by comparing it with the Karen and the English Burmese version. And then she selected some of the lines that she likes from the English Bible, and she displayed them, and she wrote them on the notice board at her restaurant in all three languages, like English one line, Karen another line, and then Burmese in the third line, talking about the same thing, like for that example. So it caught the attention of a foreign customer, regular customer at her restaurant, who is also an English teacher and a Christian. And he liked it, and they talked to each other, and he finally gave her various quotations that she can write for 6 months. So she had the long list of things that she can write. Every day one line, and she changed it another day. And she has to provide the equivalent translation in Karen and in Burmese. And it gives her a wonderful opportunity to speak English with foreigners in English in Burma. In Burma, unlike here, we don't have many foreigners yet. So if you have it's very rare to be able to practice English with the English speaker. So all these students have led me to my take on autonomy. Autonomy, I believe, is a universal human potential, and like many other forms of human knowledge, it is triggered by circumstances, it is contextual, and it can be demonstrated in various forms that we do not normally recognize in various levels. But all these various forms of autonomy that I have observed in those students are initiated by those students outside the classroom environment, and is triggered by various personal circumstances and situations. Inside the class, if you look at them, they may look passive. They don't answer to the teacher's questions because they don't have the opportunity because of what the teacher does or the various task types that we use. So what I like to talk about, why is there such a difference in their autonomy? Like in one situation, they are very highly autonomous, they create their own opportunities, but in the classroom, they don't demonstrate that kind of autonomy. So I believe that because autonomy is contextual, it is triggered by circumstances. And here is one quotation. That person is Snowden, is talking about, we only know what we know when we need to know it. Human knowledge is deeply contextual. It is triggered by circumstance. We know a lot of the things that we don't know. And unless we are in the kind of circumstance, the situation, we will never know that we know these things. So I'd like to tell you the title of my talk is the beginning of my talk. And what I'd like to talk about here is what sort of circumstance that we can create in our classroom through language learning tasks to allow that kind of human potential to exercise autonomy. And I'd like to talk about the kind of conditions that we can create, like creativity, creative tasks, and constraint, which is the topic that I'm working on right now. So this is the outline of my talk. I'd like to talk about what is creativity and why is it important for language learning and autonomy, and how can we exercise, promote creativity for language learning and autonomy. And I will also show you examples, and I will also give you some studies that I and my students conducted. Now, what is autonomy? It's like, according to cognitive psychologists, they say that autonomy, creativity is the ability to come up with new valuable ideas. And it involves using various kinds of creative processes, like various kinds of thinking, like exploratory thinking, combinational, and transformational thinking. Like exploratory thinking is like trying to explore all the possibilities using the existing rules or within the current conceptual space, like playing chess. You had the set rules that we had to follow, but every time we played it, we can come up with new moves, explore all the possibilities. Whereas combinational thinking is like producing new ideas by combining various ideas which are not related to one another in an unusual way, like metaphors and similes and things like that. Transformational thinking is like sometimes in order to produce new idea, we need to somehow change the rules, some of the rules a little bit. We have to transform our current conceptual space. And I believe that why is it important for language learning and autonomy, creativity, the need to say something new, the ability to produce new idea? Why is it important? Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about complex dynamic theory or language learning. In recent years, they argue that need to say something new can help us to stretch our language, explore language, and transform our language, especially our grammar will become more complex because of the desire to say something new. Like these people talk about language grows in complexity over time to deal with complex tasks, or linguistic science are continually created to meet new needs and circumstances. So as our experience change, as we had new things to talk about, we create language, we make our language. Like this view of language has been applied to understand the evolution of human language. Our human beings had developed a complex language because we had complex needs to talk about. Our experiences change all the time. Like if we look at the children language, children does not go to the school to learn their mother tongue. They just learn it alongside their experience about the world. As their experiences change, as they experience something new in their daily life, they try to complexify their language. They try to come up with complex grammar because they have the desire to talk about something new. So I also believe that creative processes like combinational, exploratory, and transformational thinking can cognitively challenge our students and is desirable for language learning. Now, how is it important for autonomy? I believe creativity is a form of exercising autonomy at a very micro level because it involves making creative choices with our language, with our ideas. And other people have also talked about that linguistic creativity is a form of autonomy as a communicator, as a person. We create our own language, we make our own language. So how do we do that? How do we promote creativity for language learning and autonomy in our language classrooms through language learning tasks? And here I would like to talk about three features, three issues. The first one is focus on known meaning, unknown meaning, rather than known meaning. And the second one is focus on partially defined goal rather than well-defined goals. And the last one is discipline and imaginative use of constraint rather than freedom in language learning tasks. And I will explain about each of them. Like the first one is focus on unknown meaning versus known meaning. What do I mean by that? If creativity is the ability to come up with new ideas, we have to somehow create a desire to talk about something new, to talk about unknown things in our classroom, making the familiar unfamiliar for our students, helping students to explore and transform their language as they use it to talk about something new. Now, if we look at the language learning tasks that we use, that we are familiar with in our language classroom, you will notice that they focus a lot on known meaning, not on unknown meaning. Like, look at this information gap task. Student A has seen the whole TV episode. Student B missed half of the episode, and they are supposed to bridge the information gap. Student A needs to tell the other student what he has seen. And you will notice that the information to be communicated is given in the form of pictures. So the information, the message is already there. So the focus is on known meaning, using language to talk about something that you already know, that you have in front of you. You just have to look for the language to talk about that. And the other students know that the other student has the secret. They know the information. So somehow it kills the desire to create something new. So what do? We tried our best. Don't look at each other's paper. Don't look at each other's pictures. You know, they end up looking at each other instead of talking, and they finish it very quickly. So that kind of situation leads to signal redundancy, like a lack of desire to create new meaning and new form, lack of desire to learn and complex language, if the meaning to be communicated is already known, why would there be a need for us to talk about it using the language? We already know it. So the second feature that I like to talk about is where defined goal versus partially defined goal. Like sometimes, some of our language learning tasks, we don't give the information to be communicated to students. It's not given either in the verbal test or the non-verbal pictures format. We tried our best to set up all kinds of imaginary situations, role-play activities, and games to create that kind of desire to talk about something unusual. But a lot of the time, if you are teachers, you will notice that students finish those tasks very quickly. They fall flat. They avoid using language, that new language items. They just retreat known, familiar, safe utterances, and they finish the task very quickly, probably because the task gives them too much freedom to choose from. The task has a well-planned structure, well-planned goal. They know right from the very beginning what they are supposed to be using language for, what sort of outcome they are supposed to come up with. We give them too much clarity, very clear instructions right from the very beginning, already printed in the textbook or in our instructions. So I'd like to give you examples of that kind of well-defined task with well-defined goal and freedom. Like imagine what the world will be like in 200 years from now on. You know, like there is a lot of freedom that they can choose to talk about in terms of ideas as well as language. And like the second one, you are going to be stranded in a deserted island. The teacher has all the power about the future. They can foresee the future. You know that you are going to be stranded. You choose 3 things and how you will use them. You have a lot of time to choose. In real life, you will never know. You will never have the opportunity. So that's what I mean by very well-structured, well-defined goals. Students know right from the very beginning the outcome of their task, what sort of output they are supposed to produce using language. It gives them a lot of freedom. The topic is already pre-given. It somehow leads them to retreat known, familiar, safe utterances. Now, what do students say about that kind of task? And one of my students in Auckland, I teach creativity in language learning and teaching special topic for MA and applied linguistics students, and they had to do small little research projects as part of their assignment. And he interviewed students, and then one student said that we tried to use what we knew. We didn't want to risk ourselves when they had a lot of freedom and when they know the task in advance. Like we knew the topic at the beginning, so we arranged our vocabulary and sentences based on the topic. So they use very safe, simple sentences. And this comes from one of my students, Johnny Kim. He stayed writing the assignment in Auckland. Now, so what happened is with this kind of task is like imaginary tasks, role-play activities fall flat. Students avoid using new language items, but they use familiar, safe utterances, probably because of cognitive fixation tendency. According to cognitive psychologists, it's like if we are faced with an unknown situation, we always tend to retreat the known to solve the unknown when we have too much freedom, right? Because this is the way that our brain works. Cognitive fixation tendency, we are stuck in our own what we know, and we don't think outside the box most of the time, unless something we do. So teachers will say, be creative, be imaginative, and there's a creativity block when there is too much freedom. So my next point is, how can we promote, how can we help our students to explore and transform their language, to broaden their possibilities in terms of language as well as ideas, to exercise autonomy at a very micro level concerning language, to help them to make their own language. Now, I'd like to talk about how our focus needs to change from focus on known meaning to unknown meaning, focus on well-defined goal to partially ill-defined goal, and through this last situation, through the imaginative and disciplined use of constraints, and which is the main focus of my talk. Now, I'd like to talk about the 3 steps that you can create in language learning tasks, and I will give you examples. The first one is idea generation. It's more like generating ideas without knowing what you will be using those ideas for. And next step, the teacher reveals some kind of constraints and rules, and students have to explore the ideas that they had generated earlier and make a meaning in retrospect within the constraint. And I show you example. Like, if I ask you, take out a piece of paper and write down names of objects, names of animals, or names of natural elements, at this stage, you won't know what I will be asking you to those items for. So if I have time, I will do that, but I will skip that one. So that's what I will tell my students. And after they have done that, they can go back and change. And I will review the constraint as part of the idea exploration phase. And I will say that now there is the two constraints. One is the formal constraint to do with language and form. The other one is to do with semantic meaning. The formal constraint is the ideas, the words that you have generated earlier. You need to use that in the sentence structure. If I were a, and I would. The semantic constraint is to express your emotions to someone you love or you hate. And we all had that kind of experience. Now, how would you say that if I were a window? I will find every crack to get inside your heart. If I were a car, imagine someone you love, not to run over the person, someone you love. Sometimes you might want to change your sentence structure because it doesn't, you had something else that you like. Our mileage or love would continue even the fuel desire had run out. Now, this is what I mean by partially ill-defined goal. You don't tell students everything. You just ask them to do something as part of idea generation phase, and you reveal some kind of constraint. They have to explore their ideas within the constraint and to talk about something new that they haven't talked about, and their language, it creates kind of chance occurrences. It allows them to make more creative choices with their language. Now, I'd like to, this is what, like idea generation phase is the aim of idea generation phase is to prevent cognitive fixation tendency, and idea exploration phase is to make the familiar unfamiliar. Like window, something that you have written down earlier, you have to somehow make it unfamiliar and transforming the known meaning into unknown meaning and to make creative choices with their language and idea. Like if we go back to the previous task, how can we transform that into a kind of creative task using my process? Now, I will just simply change the procedure. Instead of telling them everything right from the very beginning, I will just review one by one. Like, as part of the idea generation phase, I can ask the student write down 3 objects, and they won't know what I will be asking them to use for. So they can't arrange their vocabulary and sentence structure in advance. And as part of the idea exploration phase, I might review simply the semantic constraint here. Now you are stranded in the deserted island. You just use those objects for survival. And it will be more realistic. In real life, we never had time to think in advance if you are going to be stranded somewhere, you know. Now, I'd like to tell you some stories that I conducted and my students conducted as well together with me, investigating about the effect of constraint on the kind of language that students produce. And how does it help them to exercise their exploratory, combinational, and transformational thinking? And I will talk about 2 studies. Now, the first one is conducted with 2 Taiwanese students studying in New Zealand at a university, and they are close friends, and they use Chinese in informal situations. And the data were collected by one of my MA in applied linguistics students. It's a replication of my earlier 2011 studies, and she used similar task type that I used in my study, and we designed those tasks together. And I will tell you more about those writing tasks. One is with high constraint, the other is low constraint, and students do those tasks in pair. And the data collected a written product that they produce, as well as the discussion, the process that they go through in coming up with those ideas. Now, these are the 2 tasks that she asked the students to do, simile and acrostic, and I will explain what is acrostic. Acrostic is like you have one word and you write it down in the vertical order, and there are 2 very high constraints, like 2 rules. One is to do with the form, the other one is to do with meaning. Form is every line must start with the letter, and the whole poem must be related to the keyword time. That's a semantic constraint. Now, simile, for the simile task, we just simply ask the student, give the simile, randomly select hope and all the other items that we put into the another bag, and we just put out randomly, and we get the simile to the student. Hope is like parking spaces. and you have to give 2 reasons to support that simile. So the second task has more freedom. They can choose anything to talk about. In the first one, they can't talk about everything that they want about time. They have to somehow follow the rules to start with every line with that letter. Now, we also show students examples like drawing is jump out of your sorrow. For simile, this is the kind of examples that we show to the students. Now, these are the 2 tasks. Now, the data for acrostics, that's what students wrote. The one thing that inhibits marriage to last eternally. And the second simile, hope is like parking spaces because it's hard to get it, and people steal each other's parking spaces, like destroying your hope. Now, just by looking at the product, we won't know what sort of process that they go through. So we look at the transcripts, like this is the first one, acrostics. So the transcripts, I will show you line by line before. But the detailed analysis of the transcript shows that in acrostics, the students go through a very complex process. First, they engage in idea generation phase, generating ideas and vocabulary without knowing, randomly, without knowing what they will be using them for in the end. They engage in kind of exploratory thinking, thinking of all the possibilities that they can come up with. And then in the middle of the task, something interesting happened. They come up with their own constraints. Apart from the task constraint, they come up with their own self-initiated constraint, and they impose themselves, those constraints on themselves. And they also work within the task constraint, which is formal and semantic constraint. And they engage in idea exploration within all those constraints. And there is a lot of evidence of exploring, combining, and transforming language, making more creative choices with their language as well as their ideas. Now, let's look at the transcripts. Like, this is what they said. What do you think? Time. Somehow I think of goal. Money. So N and S are the initial of those 2 students. Time is money. Time is money. Time is money. So the symbols used in transcript, like when you see the X sign, means they laugh. And they use a lot of Chinese as well. The translation are typed in italic form, and the normal forms are the English ones that they speak. And they continue like this, kind of brainstorming. Let's write it down. Money, marriage, and what else? Food. And when they are writing that one, they are feeling very hungry. They are doing the task before dinner. So food. And then money, marriage, patience. Money, marriage, patience. So they continue doing that. Life, love, pressure, age. One thing leads to another. They had no idea what they will be using those vocabulary for. Study, universe. Why universe? Because you had no idea. This is something different. And belief. Why? Because you said universe. Just based on something that each other said. And they are very close friends, so they engage in that kind of playfulness. So, and they continue, and they go back to their normal meaning of time, watch, and jewelry. Why? Because you said watch. Okay, forever, speed. Oh, is it physics? I read a book recently about physics. So they are using all the something that is happening outside as well. And distance. So what they are doing right now up to that stage is just generating ideas randomly without knowing what they will be using them for. Kind of like idea generation phase, and they engage in exploratory thinking, thinking how far you can go. I think of all the possibilities that you can come up with. And then suddenly something happened. They try to impose some kind of constraint rule on themselves. Okay, let's think about something else. Apart from thinking of vocabulary, let's think about behavior. And they said, oh, marriage is a behavior, and cooking, again, hunger. Makes them think about food and cooking, and cooking takes time, etc. So gradually, they are trying to elaborate their vocabulary into sentence. Right? And the next step, again, they come up with another constraint that they impose on themselves, and they said that student S said that, oh, should we categorize what we write? So they try to categorize all the vocabulary that they have come up with so far into different categories, and they make all the reasoning, like age is more like something, okay? Love is more like forever, and they group all the vocabulary into 5 groups. And you will notice that the second group has the longest list of vocabulary just by chance. And this becomes another there are rules. Like they said that there's another constraint that they impose on themselves. Okay, we have more words in group 2, so let's start with group 2. What do you think? And they continue with that, and they had a lot of problems thinking about that. And suddenly, next step is like they try to explore their idea more within the constraint of the task, starting with the lines. Across every line need to start with the letter. So she's as the mind energy. I like to write minds, and so they are looking across the task constraint now, mind energy, M and E. And then for T, they choose something, the one, which is easy. The one, mind, something, E, right? And they don't know what they will write. And suddenly it's eternal, because beliefs are eternal. You know, like one of the vocabulary that they came up with earlier in group 2 is beliefs, but it doesn't fit the root or acrostic, so they had to somehow transform belief into something that starts with E. So she came up with eternal. And that is an interesting turn in their writing. Suddenly S realized, oh, time may cause marriage to prevent marriage from going eternally. So suddenly she finds the discovery, the connection between time, marriage, one of the vocabulary that they had generated earlier, as well as eternal, the recent one that her partner, the other student came up with. And she explained. And she even tried to connect it with the one thing that they came up with earlier, trying to connect all of them together. And the next one, they talk about eternal, like for focuses on form, is it a noun, adjective, ever, and then give me a sentence, and it's not very sure about the connection yet. And so S explains again, the one thing that prevents marriage going eternally, because time has limit. And suddenly Anne realized, oh, this is very good, and she's very excited. And they laugh. So up to that stage, they got these lines. They haven't got a line that starts with I yet. So what do you think they will do? They had to transform their language further. And as said, oh, the one thing that inhibits is like prevents. So she changed prevents into less frequent vocabulary, inhibit. And they check it in the dictionary, and they try to connect it like this is the lines that they came up with at this stage. And you will notice that the task is over now. They can stop there. They have fulfilled the requirement of the task, but they continue. They continue writing, and they said it's very cool, it's fine, and this is what they got so far. And suddenly, S has the desire to further transform her language because the idea just came up. They discover something new. So it gives them the natural desire to transform their language. Or the one thing that inhibits marriage going, can we think of better words than go? And they try to suggest hold, sustain, and last. Oh, yes, to last. And that's what they came up with. And this is the final poem that they write. The one thing that inhibits marriage to last eternally. So they go through a lot of interesting process. So this is the process that they go through: idea generation, imposing set initiated constraint, working within the task constraint, exploring ideas within those constraints, and there's a lot of evidence of exploring, combining unusual vocabulary in an unusual way, transforming their language, making more creative choices with their language and ideas. Now we look at the second one, which has a lot of freedom to choose in terms of ideas and language. This is what they write in the end. So how did they come up with the idea? It looks interesting, but if you look at the process, you find something else. The process is like, N is the one who dominates here. She also dominates in the previous task as well. She retrieves her existing experience about parking because she's the one who drives. S doesn't drive. And they have less opportunity for negotiation of meaning and form, less opportunity for exploring and transforming their language and meaning. Now, if you look at the transcript, that's what they do. We had to write 2 reasons, and N immediately come up with something, and she said, immediately come up with in line 515 with one of the lines that they use in the end, people turn to see parking spaces. Why is it like hope? Because it's like taking your hope away. And so negative. So she had a lot of negative experience with parking, and she continued and talking about her experience. And how many reasons do we have to write? And immediately suggests another reason. Parking spaces are hard to get, steal parking places. And these are the ideas which they use finally in the poem as well. So it's very different from writing acrostic. And then they try to change their language, but unlike the one in acrostic, they just modify their language in a very minor way, because they already got the ideas, which is something very familiar. So they try to add a little bit more like each other's. And in terms of sentence structure, just split the sentence, just put the slash in the middle, or just put the and. And is always the one that you can use to connect ideas. So the process that they go through to transform their language is also very simple here. And finally, this is the poem that they came up with. Very easy, and they came up with very quickly. So if you look at simile tasks, when they had a lot of freedom to choose, Anne is the one who generates lots of ideas because she has the personal experience with parking. And it happens a lot of the time in our language classroom as well. One student will dominate the discussion because they had a lot to say about familiar things. They had the experience about the topic. S does not have the opportunity to transform her ideas. Both of them, they do not much test their linguistic boundaries and meaning. In the acrostic task with high constraint, Anne generates lots of ideas again. She engages in exploratory thinking. But here, as the quiet one, has the opportunity to combine her ideas in an unusual way to transform her ideas. Okay? And they complement each other. So, and both of them engage in linguistic choices, and they test and broaden their boundaries, linguistic and conceptual space. So I believe that too much freedom, too much background knowledge, too much familiar experience can lead to a lack of desire to explore and transform their language, because the meaning to be communicated is already known and familiar, like signal redundancy. Now I'd like to show you another study, which is nothing to do with creative writing. Again, in a university, student study in a university in New Zealand. I give the writing task to my students. Write about a very good or bad class that you had in the past. Describe what happened in the class in detail. Make the reader see, feel, and hear the things that made it good or bad. And this is the kind of task that you will find in an EAP writing class, like expository writing. And students come up with immediately, like that comes to their mind is the paragraph structure, the predictable paragraph structure, the topic sentence, the supporting detail, 1, 2, second reason, etc. So they focus on known language pattern. It also makes it extremely boring for the teacher to read and mark them, one after another, talking about the same thing, using the same sentence structure. And you will notice that a lot of my students, I've been asking their task year after year, although the instruction is about write about the one good or bad class, they always write about the teacher. They blame the teacher for everything in their life. And when I do the task with teachers, you know what they write about? Students. We never see it ourselves. So, and it's kind of like fossilized meaning. Their meaning is fossilized the way they think about classroom only in terms of teacher. Teacher is the one to be blamed or to be complimented. Along with the fossilization in meaning, what happens is their form is also fossilized. I noticed that the sentence structure never changed. Like using the same sentence structure, teacher plus verb, because the meaning is fossilized, the form is also fossilized. So this is the example of a bad class. She would do most of the talking. She seems to show. She always praises. She does not show, etc. The simple sentence structure beginning with she plus verb. And this is the good one. Again, similar sentence structure, she. And they write a lot about she. So it shows that there are a lot of women teachers or a lot of bad women teachers. And how do I transform that kind of task into a creative task? I just simply use my principle, idea generation phase. Maybe the writing one that they produce can be regarded as part of the first idea generation phase. And the second part is the key of the creative task is finding the kind of right constraint to impose on our students. What sort of constraint is likely to broaden their linguistic possibility and conceptual possibilities? And I need to identify things that they are fossilized, like what sort of things they keep mentioning. and impose that constraint somehow, and they had to explore it again, the same experience within the constraint. So the instructions that I give is like, now revise what you have written. This time the word teacher is banned. You are not allowed to use the word teacher or any other words that refer to the teacher. Talk about the same class again within the constraint. We like to know what they were. So this is the formal constraint by banning here, input restriction, no input requirement, input restriction. So my original aim was to encourage students to look at the language class in another way. But other interesting things happen. So what do you think my students will write about? What sort of form they will use? Any guess? I had no idea at the time. I was so excited to read their writing, which I never had. And when I read it, they are still writing about a teacher without the word teacher. You know, it happens when you have a strong desire to say something and you ban the word, they create language. Natural emergence of passive voice. And different knowledge and forms triggered by circumstance. You know, like, I believe that in the history of human language, passive voice must have emerged because of this condition. You are not allowed to talk about the authorities or the leader or teachers. And what do? We create our language. We make language and passive voice. Very convenient. Now, this is what happens after constraint. Here, talking about a good class. Like you can see, students were allowed. They were always encouraged. They were challenged. They were announced, teaching aids were used, name cards were used, students were assigned, students were taken, you know, like all the things about teacher without the word teacher using passive voice, which they did not use in the first one. Now, apart from passive voice, other patterns has also emerged. Like they use variety of sentence structure this time. Unlike the first one, they use the same sentence structure, she plus verb, but now their sentence structure, variety are used. Like this is the first writing before the constraint, she plus verb, sentence structure. And the same students after the constraint, you will see that the sentence structures are very varied and variety. The class is turned into, the class time is spending time. Students end up, and some students are called and called. There are some students, and the one in the middle is interesting. Frequently calling students without giving them time to think will make intimate students to feel, etc. So this is a very complex sentence structure, nominalization. And have students work in groups, and one or two students, and everyone gets the same grades, resentment and conflicts fail. So the sentence structures are very varied and complex sentence structure as well. Now, I believe that constraint, rather than freedom, will lead to unpredictable novel outcomes. It makes the reading task very interesting because you don't know what your students will do. And it also makes them, give them an opportunity to exercise their creativity and autonomy, which is the universal human potential, and which they will be triggered under the right circumstance. So by banning the word teacher, they come up with all the linguistic possibilities, like passive voice, complex sentence structure, which they did not do in the first one, when they had a lot of freedom. So for conclusion, I believe that we can set up certain kind of features in our language learning task in order to encourage students to make creative choices, to broaden their linguistic boundaries, and some of the conditions that we can set up that I have mentioned are the need to say something new, creating kind of partially ill-defined tasks. We don't tell everything to our students, and we use constraint, idea generation, idea exploration, etc. And we can create those circumstances to help students to discover and exercise their autonomy and creativity with language. And I believe that learning is about providing space for new ideas and new language to emerge, space in which all meaning, all language is transformed, and providing space for learners to retrieve, explore, combine, and transform their knowledge, and space for new meaning to emerge. Thank you. This is another picture from Burma. Just come down here.
Now we have 10 minutes for questions. Microphone is at the back. Questions? Okay.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. I have a question about the Taiwanese girls who were doing the acrostic. I wonder if them being very good friends made a kind of a safe environment for them to be able to be as creative as they were. I wonder if you had any data from students who were maybe less friendly with each other and how that group dynamic affects the creativity.
Yes. I do a lot of that kind of tasks with my students, and I haven't actually got time to compare the relationship between students and how it has an effect on the language and the process that they go through. But I think Vygotsky is the one who talks about that kind of idea. Like if you like to find out about the process of language learning, you need to somehow set up a kind of situation where students are familiar with each other, so that it creates the kind of, you can find out exactly about what goes on in their mind. If they are not friendly with each other, they might not talk that way, right? So I think the one reason that I also use pair work is because I like to find out what happens in our brain. And I can't do it individual tasks because I did it at the beginning of my study, asking students to work on your own, try to think aloud whatever that you are thinking inside, and it's so unnatural. People just don't do that. So that's why I set up the pair work task, just to find out exactly how they came up with the ideas. So one of the conditions that I need to create for that kind of situation is they know each other, so that will help me to discover. Yeah. And it also tells us about all the implications that we have for language teaching classroom. Sometimes students just don't talk because they don't know each other. Yeah.
Hi. Your talk is very interesting, but is it possible to see that creativity is the result of the autonomy, or not the cause of autonomy? It's not something that leads to autonomy.
And why do you think so?
Because from my experience, I found that Thai students, actually, I'm not sure whether they're lazy to think or they actually don't have. I don't want to think that they don't have creativity. Actually, I was thinking whether it's something genetic or not. Yes, I believe actually it's maybe related to circumstances, but I don't understand why so many Thai students don't express their creativity.
Maybe they are not in the right situation yet. If you look at my tasks, these are the same students behaving differently in two different tasks. In one task, they are exercising their linguistic choices, but in another task, they finish the task very quickly, just retrieving known familiar utterances. So it shows that under right circumstance, everybody has the potential for creativity and autonomy. And talking about the relationship between creativity and autonomy, I know that in a lot of literature, people say that autonomy is the one which leads to creativity. Currently, a lot of people are fascinated with that kind of causal relationship. Either one thing leads to another, or another thing leads to the one. But I'm more interested in the kind of idea of co-emergence. Things in life co-emerge together. I'm not interested very much in the causal relationship. For me, creativity and autonomy grow side by side if I follow the kind of complexity dynamic theory. Like things happen together.
Thank you for the question. You speak English after all. Anyone else? Sorry.
Thank you for your talk. Yeah. It was very interesting for me, and I definitely want to learn more about creative tasks and try them, definitely. So thank you. I do a lot of work in junior high schools and senior high schools in Japan. And so you'll have like a class of 40 students, and they don't know much English. And some students have learning disabilities, and some students have problems at home. And from my experience, classes with ill-defined goals have been recipes for failure. And so usually classes are very structured, language use is very controlled, but that has been successful in getting all 40 students with varying abilities, to participate. I'm very interested in how creative tasks can be adapted to students with, who are beginning to learn English that have very limited vocabulary. So if you could point me in the direction
Yes.
of.
I had the same problem as well. When I did those tasks, I had to give a lot of time. Like when we talk about constraint, there are two kinds of constraint. One is task-related constraint. The other one is like external constraint, like in terms of time. How much time do we give students? So external constraint doesn't work with creative tasks. We give them a lot of time. So I would normally do the kind of task at the end of the day, like homework. You go home and write about your teacher. And next day, I will collect the writing and I will correct it at home. And I will impose a particular kind of constraints for each student. And I will just simply give it back to them. The next task, when you get back home, to rewrite the task again using the constraint. So they will do a lot of the activities outside the class. It is work when they have plenty of time to think about in their own home environment. Because I do this just for my study pair work, they don't need to do it pair work. They can do it individually, some of the creative tasks. You just reveal it step by step, one time at a time. And it creates the kind of suspense. They don't know what the teachers will ask them to do. And then you just reveal the constraint, go back home and think about it on the way to home. I normally ask my students to think about my task when you are, instead of using the mobile phone, when you are waiting at the bus stop, you have plenty of time to think about your task. So this is the kind of situation that I will create. I don't recommend doing all those tasks inside the classroom. You can break it down into 2 different days, and you just ask them along with your other normal tasks.
Any more questions? We still have a few minutes.
That's all.
No? Okay.
Thank you.
Then may we have the honor of inviting Associate Professor Dr. Ponnapit Daraswang on the stage to present our speaker a token of appreciation.